Jake had always been the kind of guy who noticed details others missed. Maybe it came from spending countless nights staring at stars through his telescope, or maybe it was just his nature. Either way, when the new girl walked into Professor Chen's astrophysics class that Tuesday morning, something about her immediately caught his attention. She moved differently than everyone else. While other students hurried to find seats, checking their phones and chatting with friends, she walked, slowly, looking around the lecture hall like she was seeing it for the first time. Her eyes lingered on ordinary things. The fluorescent lights, the whirring of the air conditioning, even the way sunlight streamed through the tall windows. Jake watched from his usual spot in the third row as she chose a seat near the back corner. She was beautiful in an unusual way, with pale skin that seemed to have never seen much sun and dark hair that caught the light strangely. But what really struck him were her eyes. They were an unusual shade of green, almost luminescent, and they seemed to take in everything with intense curiosity. "That's the new exchange student," whispered Tom, his study partner, following Jake's gaze. "Name's Zara. Pretty weird, right? She asked me yesterday what building this was, even though it's written in huge letters right above the entrance." Jake shrugged, but he kept stealing glances at her throughout the lecture. Professor Chen was discussing stellar formation, and while most students were either taking notes or fighting sleep, Zara sat completely still, hanging on every word. Her expression was so focused it was almost unsettling. After class, Jake gathered his books slowly, hoping to catch another glimpse of her. As students filed out, Zara remained seated, staring at the star charts Professor Chen had left displayed on the projector screen. She looked so absorbed that Jake wondered if she'd forgotten where she was. "Interesting stuff, right?" Jake said, walking over to her row. She turned to look at him, and up close, those green eyes were even more striking. "Yes," she said simply, her voice carrying a slight accent he couldn't place. "Very educational." There was something odd about the way she said it, like she was choosing each word carefully. Most people would have said fascinating or cool, or complained about how boring it was. Educational seemed like such a formal choice. "You're Zara, right? I'm Jake. I saw you're new here." "Yes, I am. Adjusting." She stood up, and Jake noticed she was wearing just a thin sweater despite the fact that autumn had arrived early this year. Everyone else was bundling up in jackets and hoodies, but she seemed completely unbothered by the temperature. "Aren't you cold?" he asked. "It's pretty chilly today." For just a moment, something flickered across her face. Surprise, maybe, or confusion. Then she wrapped her arms around herself. "Oh yes, very cold. I am not used to this weather." But here was the strange thing. Jake had spent enough time outdoors to recognize real cold reactions. When people were genuinely cold, they moved differently. Their breathing changed, their posture shifted. Zara's shivering looked almost practiced, like she was remembering how to do it rather than actually feeling it. "Where are you from?" Jake asked as they walked out together. "Far away," she said, which wasn't really an answer. "A small place. You probably have not heard of it." Over the next few days, Jake kept running into Zara around campus. She seemed to be everywhere: the library, the student center, the observatory where Jake often went to use the telescopes. Each time she was studying people, watching how they interacted, how they moved, how they talked. When he suggested they study together for their upcoming exam, she agreed immediately. They met at the library on a Thursday evening. Jake arrived, to find Zara at a corner table, surrounded by textbooks but not really reading them. Instead, she was watching other students, a group cramming for finals, a couple sharing headphones, friends passing notes, and trying not to laugh. "Find something interesting?" Jake asked, sliding into the seat across from her. "Humans are complex," she said, then quickly corrected herself. "I mean, people here are different from where I come from. Very social." Jake opened his textbook, but he found himself studying Zara instead of stellar physics. She sat perfectly straight, her hands folded neatly on the table. When she read, she moved her lips slightly, like she was sounding out unfamiliar words. and every few minutes she would glance at him with an expression he couldn't quite interpret. About an hour into their study session, she shivered dramatically. "It's so cold in here," she said, rubbing her arms. Would it be okay if I sat closer? For warmth?" Jake looked around. The library was actually quite warm. Other students were in t-shirts and light clothing, but Zara looked genuinely uncomfortable, so he moved his chair closer and gestured for her to do the same. When she scooted her chair next to his, he caught a whiff of something unusual. Not perfume or shampoo, but something clean and strange, like the air after a lightning storm. And when her arm brushed against his as they shared the textbook, her skin felt perfectly warm, not cold at all. "Better?" he asked. "Much better," she said. And for the first time since he'd met her, she smiled, genuinely. It transformed her entire face, making her look less otherworldly and more human. They spent the next 2 hours studying side by side. Zara asked the most unusual questions, not about the material they were covering, but about basic concepts that any college student should know. She wanted to understand why humans chose to study space when they lived on a planet. She asked about emotions, about why people formed relationships, about why Jake chose to spend his nights looking at stars instead of socializing like other students his age. "I guess I've always felt like there was something more out there," Jake explained, pointing to a diagram of distant galaxies. "Like we're not alone in the universe. Doesn't it seem impossible that Earth is the only planet with life?" Zara was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft. "What would you do if you discovered life existed somewhere else?" "I'd want to understand it," Jake said immediately. "Learn about it. Maybe even make contact if possible. Wouldn't that be amazing? To meet someone from another world?" Something passed across Zara's face, an emotion Jake couldn't read. She looked down at the textbook, then back at him. "Yes," she said quietly. "It would be amazing." When the library announced it was closing, they packed up their things together. As they walked outside, the autumn air was genuinely cold, and Jake pulled on his jacket. Zara, still in just her thin sweater, wrapped her arms around herself again. "Here," Jake said, starting to take off his jacket. "You can borrow this." "Oh, I could not." "It's fine, I've got a hoodie underneath." He draped the jacket over her shoulders, and she pulled it close around herself. But instead of looking grateful or relieved, she seemed fascinated by the jacket itself, running her fingers over the zipper, examining the fabric, studying the way the sleeves hung on her small frame. "Thank you," she said finally. "This is very kind." Again, that careful word choice. Most people would say nice or sweet. Kind was more formal, more distant. As they walked across campus together, Jake found himself stealing glances at her. In his jacket, she looked smaller, more vulnerable, but there was still something about the way she moved, the way she watched everything around them, that made him feel like she was the one studying him rather than the other way around. When they reached the dormitories and had to part ways, Zara started to take off his jacket. "Keep it tonight," Jake said. "You can give it back tomorrow." "Tomorrow?" she asked, and there was something hopeful in her voice. "We could study again if you want. Maybe grab coffee first?" Her smile was brilliant. "I would like that very much." As Jake walked back to his own dorm, he found himself thinking about everything that had seemed strange about Zara. The way she talked, the way she moved, her intense fascination with ordinary things, her unusual questions and formal speech patterns. The fact that she never seemed genuinely cold despite constantly claiming to be. Most guys would probably just chalk it up to her being foreign, from a different culture. But Jake's mind worked differently. He noticed patterns, inconsistencies, details that didn't add up. And everything about Zara felt like a puzzle he was only beginning to understand. What he didn't know was that somewhere across campus, Zara was sitting in her dorm room, still wearing his jacket, running her fingers over the fabric and wondering how something as simple as human kindness could feel so unexpectedly overwhelming. She had a job to do, observations to make, data to collect. But for the first time since arriving on Earth, she found herself wanting to understand something that had nothing to do with her mission. She wanted to understand Jake Martinez, and that realization both thrilled and terrified her in ways she hadn't expected. 2 months had passed since that first study session, and Jake found himself completely fascinated by Zara in ways he couldn't explain. They had fallen into a comfortable routine: coffee before their Tuesday and Thursday classes, study sessions, at the library, long walks around campus when the weather was nice. Well, when the weather was nice for everyone else. Zara seemed to find every day too cold. It had become almost comical how often she claimed to be freezing. Just yesterday, they had been sitting in Jake's apartment with the heater running full blast. The temperature was so warm that Jake had taken off his sweater and was sitting in just a t-shirt. But Zara, curled up on his couch in a thick hoodie, had started that familiar shivering routine. "I'm so cold," she had said, wrapping her arms around herself. "Could I sit closer to you?" Jake had looked at the thermostat showing 78 degrees and wondered if something was wrong with her circulation. But he scooted over anyway, and she had immediately pressed against his side, sighing contentedly. The weird thing was, whenever they touched, her skin always felt perfectly normal. Not cold, not warm, just right. Like her body temperature was somehow always exactly what it should be. And there were other strange things too. Things that Jake was starting to notice more and more, like how Zara never seemed to know basic things that everyone their age should know. Last week she had asked him what a microwave was for, not how to use it, but what its actual purpose was, like she had never seen one before. When they watched movies together, she would ask the most unusual questions about human behavior, as if she was studying it rather than just enjoying the story. "Why do they kiss when they're happy?" she had asked during a romantic comedy. "And also when they're sad? It seems like the same action for opposite emotions." Jake had laughed, thinking she was being philosophical, but the way she asked it, with genuine curiosity and confusion, made him wonder if she was serious. Then there was the way she talked about space. Most people in their astrophysics class were interested in the subject, but Zara discussed distant planets and star systems like she had personal knowledge of them. During one late-night conversation, she had described what it might be like on a planet orbiting a red dwarf star, with such vivid detail that Jake had asked if she was writing science fiction on the side. "Oh no," she had said quickly. "I just have a very active imagination." But it hadn't sounded like imagination. It had sounded like memory. Tonight was different, though. They were sitting on the roof of Jake's apartment building, sharing a blanket and looking up at the clear autumn sky. Jake had brought his portable telescope, and they had been taking turns looking at Saturn and Jupiter. It was actually a warm evening for October, but predictably, Zara had claimed to be cold within minutes of arriving. "The stars look so different from here," she said quietly, and something in her voice made Jake look at her instead of the sky. "Different from where?" he asked. She was quiet for a moment. "From home. Where I grew up, we couldn't see them as clearly." Jake waited, hoping she would say more. In all the time they had spent together, Zara had never really talked about her background. She deflected questions about her family, her childhood, even basic things like what her hometown looked like. It was like she had appeared in his life fully formed, with no past to speak of. "What was it like?" he asked gently. "Where you're from?" Zara pulled the blanket tighter around herself, even though the evening was pleasant. "Very different from here. Quieter, less crowded. Do you miss it?" Another long pause. "Sometimes, but not as much as I thought I would." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars. Jake found himself studying Zara's profile in the dim light. She was looking up at the sky with an expression he had never seen before. Not curious or interested, but sad. Almost homesick. "Zara," he said carefully, "can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Are you really cold all the time, or is that just an excuse to sit close to me?" He had meant it as a joke, a light way to address something that had been puzzling him for weeks. But Zara's reaction surprised him. She turned to look at him, and in the starlight her unusual green eyes seemed to shimmer. "Would it bother you if it was?" she asked quietly. "If it was what?" An excuse. Jake felt his heart skip a beat. No, he said honestly, it wouldn't bother me at all. I like having you close. Something shifted between them in that moment. Zara moved closer, not with her usual dramatic shivering, but slowly, deliberately. When she leaned against him, Jake wrapped his arm around her shoulders. Jake, she said softly, what would you do if someone you cared about was keeping a secret from you? A big secret? Depends on the secret, I guess, and why they were keeping it. What if they were keeping it to protect you? Or because they were afraid you wouldn't understand? Jake thought about it. I'd want them to trust me enough to tell me the truth, whatever it was. Zara was quiet for so long that Jake wondered if she had fallen asleep. But then she spoke, so quietly he almost missed it. What if the truth was something impossible? Something that would change everything? Before Jake could answer, something bright streaked across the sky above them. Then another. And another. Meteor shower, Jake said excitedly, reaching for his telescope. This is perfect timing. But when he looked at Zara, she wasn't watching the meteors with wonder like most people would. She was staring at them with an expression of pure longing, her eyes filled with tears. Hey, Jake said, concerned. Are you okay? She wiped her eyes quickly. Yes, sorry, they're just beautiful. But as more meteors blazed across the sky, Jake heard her whisper something under her breath. It sounded like words, but not in any language he recognized. The sounds were musical, almost like singing, but completely foreign. What was that? He asked. Zara looked startled, like she hadn't realized she was speaking out loud. Oh, nothing. Just something from home. A poem about stars. Jake wanted to ask more, but something in her expression stopped him. She looked vulnerable in a way he had never seen before, like she was fighting some internal battle. They watched the meteor shower in silence after that, but Jake's mind was racing. All the strange little things about Zara were starting to add up to something bigger, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. The way she talked about space, her unusual questions about human behavior, her formal way of speaking, and now this, crying at meteors and speaking in unknown languages. When they finally packed up to go back downstairs, Zara helped him carry the telescope. As they reached the door to the stairwell, she suddenly stopped. Jake, she said, thank you. For what? For being patient with me, for not pushing when I can't answer your questions, for letting me be close to you, even when I'm being strange. Jake set down his equipment and turned to face her. Zara, you're not strange. You're just different, and I like different. She smiled, but it was tinged with sadness. You might not feel that way if you knew everything about me. Try me, Jake said, meaning it. For a moment it looked like she was going to say something important. Her mouth opened and Jake held his breath, sensing that whatever she was about to tell him would matter. But then she seemed to change her mind. Instead, she stood on her tiptoes and kissed his cheek softly. Good night, Jake, she said, and disappeared through the stairwell door before he could respond. Jake stood alone on the roof for a few minutes, touching the spot where she had kissed him. The night air was warm, but he found himself shivering slightly. Not from cold, but from the growing certainty that Zara was hiding something big, something that explained all the little mysteries about her. What he didn't know was that one floor below, Zara was standing in the hallway outside her apartment, her hand pressed against the door, fighting the urge to go back upstairs and tell him everything. The meteors had reminded her of home in a way that was almost painful, and Jake's kindness made her mission feel more complicated than it had ever been supposed to be. She had come here to study humans, to understand their culture and their emotions. But somewhere along the way she had started feeling those emotions herself, and that wasn't part of the plan at all. The next few weeks brought a new intensity to Jake and Zara's relationship. They spent almost every free moment together, and Jake found himself falling for her in ways that surprised him. But with those growing feelings came growing questions. There was the night he had brought her soup when she claimed to have a cold, only to find that she didn't seem to have any actual symptoms. No fever, no congestion, No fatigue, just a claim of being unwell that seemed to disappear the moment he arrived to take care of her. There was the afternoon they had studied in the campus greenhouse, surrounded by tropical plants and warm, humid air. While Jake had been sweating in the heat, Zara had still insisted she was cold, pressing close to him on the bench they shared. And there was the growing sense that she was studying him as much as she was enjoying his company. Sometimes he would catch her staring at him with an analytical expression, like she was trying to figure something out. When he asked what she was thinking about, she would always deflect with another request for closeness. "I'm cold," had become her answer to everything. The breaking point came on a Friday evening in late November. Jake had invited Zara over to his apartment to watch a documentary about space exploration. It was something he thought she would enjoy, given her interest in astrophysics. But as they watched footage of rockets launching and astronauts floating in zero gravity, Zara's reactions were all wrong. Instead of wonder or excitement, she looked almost homesick. And when the documentary showed images of Earth from space, she made a small sound that might have been a sob. "Are you okay?" Jake asked, pausing the video. "Yes, sorry, it's just emotional, seeing our planet like that." Our planet. The way she said it sounded strange, like she was trying to convince herself as much as him. Jake turned to face her on the couch. "Zara, can we talk about something?" "Of course." She immediately moved closer to him. "But could you hold me? I'm getting cold." Jake looked at her carefully. She was wearing one of his sweatshirts, thick socks, and had a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. The apartment was warm enough that he was comfortable in just a t-shirt. "You're not cold," he said gently. Zara froze. "What do you mean? You're never actually cold. Your skin is always perfectly warm when we touch. You don't shiver like someone who's genuinely cold. And you claim to be freezing even when it's warm enough that everyone else is comfortable." For a long moment, Zara didn't say anything. Then, she pulled the blanket tighter around herself, but not because of temperature. It was like she was trying to hide. "I don't know what you mean," she said quietly. "Zara, I care about you. A lot. But I know you're hiding something from me, and it's getting harder to pretend I don't notice." Jake reached over and gently took her hand. As always, her skin felt perfectly normal, not cold at all. "See?" he said softly. "You're not cold. You never are." Zara looked down at their joined hands, and Jake saw her eyes fill with tears. "You're right," she whispered. "I'm not cold." "Then why do you always say you are?" She was quiet for so long that Jake wondered if she was going to answer at all. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. "Because it's the only way I know how to ask for what I want." "Which is?" "To be close to you." She looked up at him, and her unusual green eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Where I come from, we don't touch the way humans do. We don't have casual physical contact. So when I wanted to be near you, to feel connected to you, I didn't know how to ask for it directly." Jake felt his heart clench. "So you pretended to be cold." She nodded miserably. "It seemed like something humans would understand. A reason you would accept." "Zara," Jake said gently, "you never needed a reason. If you wanted to be close to me, all you had to do was ask." "Really?" "Really." He squeezed her hand. "But there's more you're not telling me, isn't there? This isn't just about being shy or coming from a different culture." Zara's breath caught, and Jake knew he was right. There was something bigger here. Something that explained not just her strange approach to physical affection, but all the other mysterious things about her. "I want to tell you," she said finally. "But I'm afraid." "Afraid of what?" "That you won't believe me. Or that you will believe me, and it will change everything between us." Jake thought about that. Whatever Zara was hiding, it was clearly something significant. Something that made her feel like she couldn't be honest with him. "What if I promised that nothing you could tell me would change how I feel about you?" Zara looked at him with an expression so hopeful and terrified that it broke his heart. "You can't promise that," she said. Not until you know what it is. Before Jake could respond, there was a strange sound from outside. Not quite music, not quite static, but something in between. Zara went completely still, her head tilted like she was listening to something Jake couldn't hear. The sound came again, and this time Jake noticed that the electronics in his apartment flickered slightly. The television, his phone, even the digital clock on the microwave seemed to pulse in rhythm with the strange noise. "What was that?" Jake asked. But Zara wasn't looking at him anymore. She was staring out the window with an expression of panic and something that looked almost like guilt. "I have to go," she said suddenly, standing up so fast that the blanket fell to the floor. "What? Zara, what's wrong?" She was already moving toward the door, and Jake could see her hands shaking as she gathered her things. "I'm sorry," she said, not looking at him. "I'm so sorry, Jake. I never meant for this to get so complicated." "For what to get complicated? Zara, talk to me." She paused at the door, her hand on the handle. For a moment, Jake thought she was going to turn around and explain everything. But then that strange sound came again, louder this time, and every electronic device in the apartment flickered in unison. "I have to go," she repeated, and before Jake could stop her, she was gone. Jake stood alone in his apartment, staring at the closed door and trying to make sense of what had just happened. The strange sound had stopped, but his electronics were still acting weird. His phone screen was flickering and the television was showing static despite being connected to cable. He walked to the window and looked out, hoping to see Zara in the parking lot below. But she was nowhere to be seen. It was like she had vanished completely. As Jake stood there trying to process what had just happened, one thought kept circling in his mind. Whatever Zara was hiding from him, it was bigger than he had imagined, and somehow he had the feeling that the strange sound and the electrical interference weren't coincidental. Something was happening, something that involved Zara in ways he didn't understand yet. But he was going to find out what it was, even if it meant discovering that the girl he was falling in love with wasn't who he thought she was at all. 3 days passed without a word from Zara. Jake called her phone repeatedly, but it went straight to voicemail every time. He checked the library, the student center, even asked Professor Chen if she had been to class. Nothing. It was like she had disappeared completely. On Wednesday evening, Jake was sitting in his apartment staring at his phone and debating whether to call campus security when there was a soft knock at his door. His heart jumped, hoping it was Zara, but when he opened it, he found a stranger standing in the hallway. The woman was tall and elegant, with the same unusual pale skin and striking features that Zara had. But where Zara always seemed to be trying to blend in, this woman looked completely out of place. She was wearing clothes that looked expensive but somehow wrong, like someone had described human fashion to her, but she had never actually seen it. "Jake Martinez?" she asked, and her voice had the same careful, formal tone that Zara used. "Yes. Who are you?" "My name is Lyra. I am here about Zara." Jake's stomach dropped. "Is she okay? Where is she?" "She is safe," Lyra said. "But I need to speak with you. May I come in?" Every instinct Jake had told him not to let this stranger into his apartment, but his worry about Zara overrode his caution. "Okay," he said, stepping back to let her in. Lyra walked into his living room and looked around with the same intense curiosity that Zara always showed. She examined his furniture, his books, the photos on his walls like she was trying to understand something about human life. "Zara told me about you," she said finally, turning to face him. "She said you were kind, intelligent, that you ask good questions. Where is she?" Jake asked again. "She is where she belongs," Lyra said. "But that is what I need to discuss with you." Lyra sat down on his couch without being invited, and Jake noticed that she moved with the same careful grace that Zara did, like she was consciously thinking about each movement. "What I am about to tell you will be difficult to believe," she said. "But Zara insisted that you deserve the truth." Jake's heart was pounding. "What truth?" Lyra was quiet for a moment, studying his face. Then she held out her hand, palm up. At first, nothing happened. Then, slowly, a small ball of light appeared floating just above her skin. It pulsed gently, casting strange shadows around the room. Jake stared at it, his mind refusing to process what he was seeing. "How are you doing that?" "The same way you regulate your body temperature," Lyra said simply. "It is a basic function for my people." The light disappeared and Lyra folded her hands in her lap. "Jake, Zara is not from Earth, neither am I. We come from a world very far from here." Jake opened his mouth to say something, to argue, to laugh, to demand an explanation, but no words came out. He felt like his brain had just stopped working. "I know this is shocking," Lyra continued, "but think about everything you have noticed about Zara. Her unusual questions about human behavior, her knowledge of space that goes beyond what your textbooks teach, the way she speaks, moves, reacts to things." Jake sank into his chair trying to process what he was hearing. It was impossible. Completely impossible. But as he thought about all the strange things about Zara, a part of him knew that Lyra was telling the truth. "She's an alien," he said quietly, testing how the words felt. They sounded ridiculous, but somehow they also made perfect sense. "She is a person from another world," Lyra corrected gently. "Just as you are a person from this world." "Why?" Jake asked. "Why did she come here? Why did she—" He struggled to find the words. "Why did she pretend to care about me?" "She was not pretending," Lyra said firmly. "That is why this situation has become so complicated." Lyra stood up and walked to Jake's window, looking out at the campus beyond. "Zara was sent here as part of a research mission. We have been studying your species for some time, trying to understand human culture and emotions. It was supposed to be simple observation." "Observation," Jake repeated numbly. But Zara began to experience feelings that she was not prepared for, emotions that we do not typically have. She became attached to you in ways that were not part of her mission. Jake felt like someone had punched him in the stomach. "So I was just a research project to her." "At first, yes," Lyra said, turning back to face him. "But not at the end." "Jake, Zara requested that I come here to tell you the truth because she could not bear to leave without you knowing who she really was." "Leave?" Jake's voice cracked. "She's leaving?" "Her mission is complete. She was supposed to return with us 3 days ago, but she refused to go until she was certain you would understand why she had to deceive you." Jake buried his face in his hands, trying to make sense of everything. The girl he had fallen in love with was an alien. She had been studying him like a lab rat. And now she was leaving Earth forever. "The thing about being cold," he said suddenly, looking up at Lyra. "That was part of the deception too." "Yes and no," Lyra said carefully. "Zara's people do not experience temperature the way humans do. We can regulate our body temperature at will. But physical contact is very important in our culture. It is how we share emotions and communicate on a deeper level. I don't understand. When Zara touched you, she was not just studying you. She was sharing her feelings with you, though you could not perceive it consciously. Every time she pressed against you, claiming to be cold, she was actually trying to connect with you in the only way she knew how." Jake thought about all those moments. Zara curled up against him in the library, sitting close to him on his couch, holding his hand under the stars. If what Lyra was saying was true, then those weren't just moments of fake intimacy. They were Zara's way of trying to communicate feelings she didn't have words for. "Can I see her?" Jake asked. "Before she leaves?" Lyra shook her head. She does not think it would be wise. She believes it would make the separation more difficult for both of you. More difficult than finding out your girlfriend is an alien through a stranger? Something that might have been a smile crossed Lyra's face. "I told her you would say something like that." Jake stood up and began pacing around his living room. "This is insane. This whole thing is completely insane." "Yes," Lyra agreed. Zara said the same thing. "What happens now?" Jake asked. "She just goes back to her world and pretends none of this happened." "That was the original plan," Lyra said. "But there have been complications." "What kind of complications?" Lyra was quiet for a moment, like she was deciding how much to tell him. Zara's mission was part of a larger study. We have been monitoring several worlds, including Earth, for signs of development that might pose a threat to the galaxy. A threat? Your species is advancing very quickly in terms of technology. Sometimes, when civilizations reach a certain point, they become dangerous. We needed to assess whether humans were likely to develop in a peaceful direction or a destructive one. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. And what did you conclude? That is still being decided, Lyra said carefully. But Zara's research has been very influential in our discussions. Her observations of human capacity for kindness, love, and cooperation have been enlightening. So what I felt with her, what we had together, that was real? Very real, Lyra said softly. Real enough that Zara has requested to stay on Earth as a permanent observer. She believes that continuing to study human development would be valuable for our people. Jake's heart leaped. She wants to stay? She wants to, Lyra said. But the decision is not hers alone to make. Before Jake could ask what that meant, there was another knock at his door. This time, when he opened it, Zara was standing in the hallway. She looked exactly the same as always, but somehow completely different now that Jake knew the truth. Her unusual green eyes, her too pale skin, the way she moved. It all made sense now. "Hello, Jake," she said quietly. "Zara." Jake's voice came out as barely a whisper. They stood there looking at each other for a long moment. Then Zara stepped into the apartment, and Lyra quietly excused herself, saying she would wait outside. When they were alone, Zara wrapped her arms around herself, not because she was cold, Jake realized now, but because she was nervous. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm sorry for lying to you, for deceiving you, for making you fall in love with someone who wasn't real. But you were real," Jake said. "What I felt when I was with you, that was real, wasn't it?" "Yes," Zara said, tears starting to fall down her cheeks. "That was the most real thing I have ever experienced." Jake crossed the room and took her hands in his. As always, her skin felt perfectly warm and somehow exactly right. "The cold thing," he said. "Lyra explained it to me, about how your people communicate through touch." Zara nodded. "Every time I said I was cold, what I really meant was that I wanted to be close to you. I wanted to share what I was feeling, but I didn't know how to ask for it directly. You could have just told me you wanted to be close to me. But I didn't understand what I was feeling then," Zara said. "My people don't experience emotions the way humans do. I didn't have words for what was happening to me." Jake squeezed her hands gently. "And now? Now I know that what humans call love is the most powerful force in the universe," she said. "And I know that leaving you would be the hardest thing I have ever done." "Then don't leave," Jake said simply. "It's not that easy. My people are still deciding whether to make continued contact with Earth. If they decide humans are too dangerous, I'll be ordered to return home immediately. And if they decide we're not dangerous," Zara smiled through her tears, "then I get to stay here and continue learning about the amazing species that taught me how to love." Jake pulled her into his arms, and for the first time since they had met, Zara didn't claim to be cold. She just held him back, letting herself be warm and safe and exactly where she wanted to be. "Whatever happens," Jake said into her hair, "I'm glad you pretended to be cold, even if it was just an excuse to be close to me." "It stopped being an excuse a long time ago," Zara whispered back. "Somewhere along the way, being close to you became as necessary as breathing." And as they stood there holding each other, Jake realized that it didn't matter that Zara was from another world. What mattered was that somehow, across the vastness of space and the differences between their species, they had found each other, and that was a kind of miracle that even an alien could understand. 6 months later, Jake woke up to sunlight streaming through his bedroom window and the sound of Zara humming in the kitchen. It was a tune he had never heard before, something from her world she had explained when he asked about it weeks ago. The decision from her people had come 3 months earlier. After reviewing all the data from various observation missions, they had concluded that humans, while sometimes chaotic and unpredictable, showed enough capacity for growth and cooperation to warrant continued peaceful contact. Zara had been authorized to remain on Earth as a cultural liaison, helping to prepare both species for eventual formal relations. Jake got up and padded to the kitchen, where he found Zara standing at the stove making breakfast. She was wearing one of his old sweatshirts and had her hair pulled back in a messy bun. She looked completely human, except for those distinctive green eyes that still took his breath away. "Good morning," he said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "Good morning," she replied, leaning back against him. "Did you sleep well?" "Always do when you're here." It had taken some time for them to adjust to complete honesty in their relationship. Zara had to learn to express her wants and needs directly instead of through elaborate excuses. Jake had to get used to the idea that his girlfriend was not technically human, and that sometimes she would have to leave for meetings with her people that he couldn't be part of yet. But they had figured it out day by day. "Are you cold this morning?" Jake asked, grinning. Zara turned in his arms and gave him a look of mock indignation. "I am never cold, and you know it." "I know," Jake said, "but I also know that sometimes you miss having an excuse to ask for what you want." Zara's expression softened. "I don't need excuses anymore. If I want you to hold me, I can just ask you to hold me." "And I always will," Jake promised. They ate breakfast together on his small balcony, watching the campus come to life below them. Students hurried to early classes, professors walked their dogs, delivery trucks rumbled down the streets. It was all perfectly ordinary and human, except for the fact that Jake was sharing it with someone from another world. "I have something to tell you," Zara said as they finished eating. Jake looked at her, noting the slight nervousness in her voice. "Good something, or concerning something?" "Good something, I think." She took a deep breath. "My people want to begin more formal cultural exchanges, starting small with just a few humans who already know about us." "That sounds amazing." "They want you to be part of the first group," Zara said, watching his face carefully. "If you're interested, you could help develop protocols for contact between our species. It would mean working closely with my people, learning about our culture, maybe even visiting our world someday." Jake stared at her. "Are you serious?" "Completely serious. They were impressed by how well you adapted to learning the truth about me, and..." She paused, a small smile playing at her lips. "They want to understand what it is about you that made me want to stay on Earth." "What do you think it is?" Jake asked. Zara considered the question seriously. "I think it's because you never tried to change me or fix me even when you knew I was hiding something. You just accepted that I was different and made space for that difference in your life. That's what you do when you love someone," Jake said simply. "Exactly," Zara said. "And that concept, loving someone not despite their differences but because of who they are entirely, that's something my people are very interested in learning more about." Jake reached across the table and took her hand. Her skin was warm and familiar now, but he still felt that little thrill of connection every time they touched. "So what do you say?" Zara asked. "Want to help two worlds figure out how to be friends?" Jake thought about everything that had led to this moment. A few months ago, he had been a regular college student whose biggest concern was passing astrophysics. Now he was in love with an alien and being invited to help facilitate first contact between species. It should have been overwhelming. It should have been terrifying. Instead, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. "I say yes," Jake said. "But I have one condition." "What's that?" "If you ever get cold, really cold, not just wanting to be close to me cold, you have to tell me immediately so I can take care of you." Zara laughed, and the sound was like music. "Deal. But Jake?" "Yeah? I don't think I'll ever be cold again. Not when I have you to keep me warm." As they sat there holding hands and planning for a future that would have been impossible to imagine just a year ago, Jake realized that sometimes the best love stories were the ones that started with the smallest deceptions. Zara had pretended to be cold to get close to him, But in the process, she had taught him that warmth, real warmth, came from connection, understanding, and the willingness to love someone exactly as they were, even if they happened to be from another planet. The universe, Jake thought as he watched Zara's eyes light up while she talked about the future, was a much more interesting and wonderful place than he had ever imagined. And he couldn't wait to explore it with her, one honest moment at a time.